This is amazing. Welcome everyone to my first LinkedIn Live, well, the first one that I've hosted. Been fortunate enough to be a guest on a LinkedIn Live. This is my first time hosting through Restream. I highly recommend this platform. So bear with me. There'll be some mistakes. It won't be perfect. I'm going to get excited by these little doobie wackies that I'm going to find. I'll probably change the background a bunch of times. Just come along for the ride and welcome everybody. My name's Mark Stabina from Winning EQ. A very, very important conversation I'm about to have with a very, very extremely special, gifted, talented. He's pretty intelligent, and a good buddy of mine, Eric Kussin. I'm going to bring him in a moment. Let me just pump him up and why I'm having this conversation. It's the end of Mental Health Awareness Month is coming up. And I wanted to get this conversation in. He's a hard man to track down because he is so active in the mental health space as an advocate, a founder of Same Here Global Mental Health Movement. It's a global alliance that when he started, I was fortunate enough to be brought in to be a part of. I love working alongside Eric, learning from him, and he is tireless when it comes to mental health awareness, advocacy, and changing the needle. He's actually doing the work, and we're going to talk about that today and how he's doing that, and more importantly, how he can inspire all of us to do the same so that we change the conversation and we continue the conversations, healthy conversations about mental health. Well, without any further ado, I'm going to bring in the great man, Eric Kussin. Welcome. Isn't this fun?
It's an incredible intro. I love the tool that you're using. Everyone should know that Mark, as you mentioned, was the first of the group of you who came together. I'll give what that group was when we had our first ever launch event at the end of 2017. So it was Theo Fleury, the NHL great. It was Tyler Hamilton, who was Lance Armstrong's top teammate in U.S. cycling. It was Anita Nall Richardson, who was the Olympic gold medalist, Amanda Beer, the decorated Olympic gold medalist, and then Mr. Mark Stabina. And I think that core group that we started off with really formed a unique bond that remains today. And whether we get on text message threads or you come with me to the outskirts of upstate New York and then we drive back and have heart-to-heart talks, it's awesome always talking to you.
And Eric, thank you for that. And just brings back fond memories when you talk about those times many years ago. I'm in the room with greatness. I'm giving you my experience of that. All these names, Olympians and legends of their respective sports. And then there's this rugby guy. I'm like, what am I doing here? But it was really, it was humbling. It was a pleasure to be a part of. I'll expand a little bit on how that came about. So that was the movement, and it started as We Are All a Little Crazy. Love the name. And now it's become Same Here, and I'll let you expand on that a little bit. But you and I were connected by a mutual source, another legend of rugby. For those watching that know their rugby, Sir John Kirwan, All Blacks legend, connected me to Eric on your screen right now because I'd written an article on LinkedIn because I wanted to express what we're talking about today. I wanted to not just raise awareness, but I'd seen when a former teammate of mine passed away. He died by suicide, Dan Vickerman. Many people in the rugby world know that name. And when he passed, it sent shockwaves through not just the rugby world, but the sporting world. And of course, when events like that happen, it raises awareness. People step forward. We need to do something about this. You had a campaign called Lift the Weight, I remember, where a bunch of high-profile athletes and rugby players got together on the back of Dan's death to say, we got to lift the weight. We've got to talk about our mental health struggles. Take the burden off yourself. You don't have to take these measures. And while it was wonderful to see the awareness inevitably dies down.
Yep.
And it does. It happens in waves. So once that awareness came about, just talking about, hey, talk about it, I was left with, okay, well, I'm an athlete transitioning into the next phase. I'm having struggles with that next step, as did Dan Vickerman and many, many more. Yes, the awareness is there to say, this is real. This is a struggle. Where's the support? So I wrote an article about, well, what's the next step? Like, where are the programs? Where's the the real support and actually making a change to normalize these conversations rather than just saying, hey, we lost another good person. This is serious. What's next? So when I wrote that article, a New Zealand on LinkedIn. So here we are. We're coming back full circle. And it was a New Zealand sports radio show. The producer reached out and said, we'd love to have you on your show. I read your article, just happenstance, on LinkedIn. Do you want to talk about it on this radio show? And as we're talking about it, and I chatted with the guys afterwards, they said, John Kerwin, we deal with him a lot and we get him on the show a lot. And he's very active in this space. I'll connect you to. So when they connected me to him, he heard about what I was hoping to do. And he said, I'm just the man for you. You live in America? Oh, I've got the guy for you. And of course, led me to the great one to my side, Eric Kussin, as you were starting up. We are all a little crazy. Expand on that a little bit more for us, please.
Yeah, absolutely. The shaking the traverse of John is an amazing guy, and talk about someone who's, the Michael Jordan of rugby down in New Zealand, and his willingness to be open, not for the purposes of merchandising himself and getting endorsement deals, but because he wanted to be vulnerable and help other people. And that was obviously a beautiful person to get introduced to. I was introduced to him by my friend Danny, who was working with AIG sponsorship at the time. AIG had their logo on the All Blacks jersey. So it's just so interesting how the different connections come about. We haven't gone away from We're All a Little Crazy. We're All a Little Crazy is still a sub-brand on the podcast with what we do. We started with We're All a Little Crazy because how do we talk to one another outside of mental health as a category? Mark, that plant behind you looks crazy green. That shirt you're wearing, you look crazy fit in, right? That doesn't mean I'm saying your shirt looks mentally ill, right? Mm-hmm. I'm using crazy as a way to describe something that embellishes it. And the issue in the mental health space, at least that I saw it, right? We don't need to go through my story on this call, but you know enough about it, is I went from not thinking I was part of the group to then it punching me in the face, mental health, and then being part of the group, and then realizing the issue of the way our society looks at this topic is it's binary. People have it, people don't. I didn't think I had it, so I didn't work on it, and then it punched me in the face. So I had to use terminology, we are all, right? Meaning this applies to everyone a little, right? So you tame it down a little bit. Crazy was in quotes. The A was upside down in the logo, as a way to get the people who weren't talking about this topic to go, Mark and Eric are using a term that I've used before, and it sounds a little related to brain health, but I'm not really sure if it's actually a mental health topic. Let me hear what they have to talk about, which is a lot different than using terms like brain health, mind matters, active minds, right? It was a completely different way to engage people. And when we were putting it out on social media, we were getting the people who, we haven't gone into the statistics yet, but we certainly will, the people who in the statistics, it didn't look like they were a part of this conversation. Now, how do we bring them into the conversation, right? And so to start to see like a Facebook page getting 60, 70,000 followers, we weren't using paid media to get that. That was organic growth. And this was in 2017 at a time when we weren't talking about it at all, though we were talking about it right now. So what started to happen was, we started to shake the trees on people who wouldn't have spoken about it otherwise. And to get them to be like, oh, like my little idiosyncrasies of the way that I wash my hands all the time, or the way that I check over bumps when I drive in the car, like that makes me a little crazy too. That's my badge of honor. Some people might find that derogatory. They might find that unfair. My feedback to those folks who would bring that up to me was, if we don't normalize it in this way, the affected group, you continue to remain the affected group and everyone else remains the healthy, fine, normal group. So you need some kind of bridge that brings these binary ideas together so that the continuum concept becomes something that we can all engage in.
Thanks, Eric. As always, brilliant. I want to expand on that point, because what you're essentially bringing up now is you mentioned part of that group versus not part of that group. To me, because I wanted to ask you about stigma. We hear so often people, even in Mental Health Awareness Month, well-intentioned messaging around, let's change the stigma, right? There's a stigma. I don't know if people fully understand what that stigma is and how they're actually feeding into the stigma. So when you say that group versus, I love the other way that you put this. 1 in 5, right? And I'll let you talk about more, but just to set it up, right? This blows me away, and I keep saying the same thing to people, and I credit you for this too. Media has talked about 1 in 5 people having mental illness, and even the language. I'm going to let you talk more about that. So naturally, it's like, okay, so 1 in 5, and the intention was, hey, it's more prevalent than you think, right? This is my understanding. So yeah, we need to be aware of that. But as you said, you naturally want to be the 4 in 5 that doesn't have, you're not part of the 1. And it's actually divisive with that messaging. And when you came along with, your effort and attempts to change that stigma, is because it makes people want to avoid that and not acknowledge their own struggles with mental health. And you were saying, hey, 5 in 5 of us actually struggle with mental health issues. That's why if you want to call a mental health issue crazy, well, we're all a little crazy, right?
Yep.
So that for me, just that drives me, and I keep sending that message. To me, that's one aspect of what I think the stigma that people talk about that might not realize. Tell us a little bit more about that and how we perpetuate that stigma, or at least the media does.
I'm a skeptic, you know me by nature, right? So when I got sick and then I realized I was in the group, the issue that I had was, to that point, I think everyone's a part of that group: divorce, job loss, breakup, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, bullying, cyberbullying, sickness of loved ones, loss of loved ones, being a caregiver for an older parent or family member. Those are the challenging life events that we all live through that shift the nervous system to maladaptive places, where we're not living our best selves the way we think, we feel, we function. So I started looking at the main messages that were out in the mental health space. This was in the end of 2017. We're in the middle of 2023 right now. That's 5.5 years, and the message has not changed. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, with the message not changing, our mental health outcomes have gotten worse. Okay. So if we have I'll steal a line from our buddy Theo. If we have the greatest awareness about mental health in the history of our planet, because more people are talking and because we have social media, yet the trends are going in the wrong direction, that means the message is not the right message, right? So let's parcel out and dive into that message. Side note, you gave me a little bit of hard time that your brand also is YOG, young, older guys, right?
Thank you.
Now I said young, old guys, right? And you corrected me and said older is different than old, right? Because it's got a different connotation to it. So that slight little tweak in that middle word makes all the difference in the world. So with that in mind of how little things make a huge impact, let's start with the 2 main messages that are in the mental health space. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And you see it now in 2023. I saw it this entire month, and those continue to get perpetuated. The first is that statistic that you talked about. 1 in 5 people are mentally ill. Why is that such an awful statistic to lead with? A number of different reasons. One, you're telling people that there's a group of affected mentally ill people, which the term mental illness is a very, very stigmatizing term. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then when you ask people, if you're not in the 1 in 5 and you're part of the 4 in 5, how would you describe your mental health? And I know this because I ask this question every time I go to an event and I run an event, and it doesn't matter if it's school kids, it doesn't matter if it's CEOs at corporations. How do you define your mental health? And the 4 answers are healthy, fine, normal, and okay. Mm-hmm. So we have a group of people who are sick and then a group of people who are good, right? That's not reality. So we've made the topic binary by leading with that statistic. When I say I'm skeptical, the skeptic in me says, what does creating binary concepts in mental health do? Sells products and services. Why? Because when you're on the line of, I'm the 1 in 5 sick, what do you have to give me to fix me to make me better? Because from the time I was sick as a little kid, when I had strep throat, bronchitis, and pneumonia, I took the medication, which was the bubblegum tasting antibiotic, and I started feeling better in 2 days.
Yep.
What does it do to the 4 and 5? It tells them I'm healthy, fine, normal, and okay, which guess what? When you don't work on your mental health, just put you into that 1 and 5 group. Now, back to being skeptical. In a space where we have advocates, if the number was truly 1 in 5, in 6 years, 5.5 years, don't you, and it's probably been going on longer than I've been looking at it, don't you think there would be some kind of validity in going, great news, we're down to 19.4%. We're up to 20.3%. That's never what's mentioned. It's always the clean line of 1 in 5.
Yeah.
Because when that clean line is in place, there's a sick group and there's a healthy group, and which line are you on, right? So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is the word stigma itself. So I'm glad that Christine here said, great approach, people engage without stigma, right? So the issue with the term stigma, twofold. 1, when we mention the term stigma in our campaigns, we're reminding people that stigma exists, okay? So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is every one of the campaigns that involves stigma is an action word followed by stigma. Stop the stigma, stomp the stigma, break the stigma, erase the stigma. Football has kicked the stigma. Hockey has slapped the stigma. Baseball has strike out the stigma.
Rugby has tackled the stigma.
Tackled the stigma. Okay. Now, for everyone who's hearing that and goes, Eric, what's wrong with that? Parcel out the reason why I used YOG, older versus old, being an example. Parcel out what the term stigma means and compare that term to the word shame. Shame means I'm feeling things myself. I want that to go away. I personally don't want to be feeling this way. Stigma means that human beings, mostly the human beings in that 4 and 5 healthy, fine, smiling, good, normal, okay group, are making unfair opinions and judgments about me and my brothers and sisters in the 1 and 5 mentally ill group. And what happens when we say stomp, stomp, break, strike out, and tackle the stigma is we are pointing fingers. So we're taking this binary idea of 1 and 5 and 4 and 5. And the 1 and 5s during May are going, you healthy people, you stop doing what you're doing. You can't take out that that's what this topic means, that that's what these campaigns mean, because the term stigma literally means people are forming those unfair opinion judges. Not my microphone I'm talking to, not the camera I'm looking in, not the desk that I'm sitting at, people. So if you put an action word in front of something, just like in politics, Mark, you're red, you're blue, you got to stop doing what you're doing. You think gun control is important? Stop that. You think mental health is important? Stop that. That's not what it is. That takes 2 sides and pulls them further apart. So when you asked about the we're all a little crazy piece, the reason why same here became our action item around how we now activate when we go into markets, you and I were the same using the American Sign Language sign, because it takes away the binary. What it says is, I'm up here on stage talking, yes, but guess what? I felt like crap this morning. I'm going to go home tonight because I'm beaten up because I'm on the road so much and my brain doesn't feel clear, but I'm going to give you my best self during the next hour and a half. But my mental health has been messed up before, and it's actually going through a lot of challenges right now, even when I'm on stage with you. Let's talk about it. That breaks down stigma way more than perpetuating the term stigma and asking people to stop it ever will.
Man, I learned so much from you. And every time I hear, even though I've heard you say this, it just further consolidates in my mind and helps me know how to, and when I'm perpetuating it, right? It's about the self-awareness. We got to do that. So as you're listening to Eric now, ask yourself the question, when do I even use the word stigma? When am I perpetuating? What am I doing that's actually contributing to and not moving the needle in the direction we want it to move? And that's A, removing the stigma, I guess, especially by not using the word stigma. Thank you, Eric. And B, look, you said something then which I think is worth mentioning, is the vulnerability. So people in positions of authority and I want to say power, even as you said, when you're on stage and you do so much great work where you travel from college to high schools and you educate, you get up on stage and you share your story straight away. That, as you said, this is how I took it. There might be that perceived barrier of you're up here and we're down here listening. You're the educator and we're listening, and we're inferior in certain ways. The way to break that is, as you do, you tell your story of when you weren't at your best. Far from it. Eric hasn't said this, folks, but he was in a near catatonic state, or catatonic, right? For most of it, for nearly 2 years, bedridden from nervous system shutting down. And it all came from trauma. As you said, we don't need to dive into it, but it's important to mention that you had that experience after being a high level, high functioning, high performance, high pressure professional sports executive. And then it all just turned upside down. And it was through your experience of coming out of that, being the 1 in 5, as you said, coming out of that and finding natural ways to do it, not through pharmaceutical drugs, that you felt called to. And this is why I think you and I relate so well, because we both feel like we've been given a second chance and we've got work to do. We need to help other people understand. That's what you're doing, my friend. When you're up on stage, it's like, this is my story, right? And it allows people to relate. And I've been with you on one of these tours. You mentioned we went to Cornell University together to talk to a bunch of students, some of whom reluctantly turned up, but I feel they did it out of, and there was enough of an environment where they felt safe to turn up with their fellow students, because there's enough in common of the mental health struggles to come and listen. And then you just saw little by little, as you shared your story, as I shared my story, they started sharing their story. And some still didn't want to share that in front of their friends, but they would come up to us backstage and in their own way, when nobody else was around, connect. And I know this for you, but for me, man, that felt good to just be able to give that permission and know that it lifted a weight for them, to know that they're not alone, and that expressing it is the first step. And you
were talking about, what's happening in the rugby world and some of the campaigns that are there, right? And I think awareness has gotten better, but I think the issue with awareness and how we have to dive deeper, and I appreciate the way that you described that event at Cornell happened, and that event came after an event that we did at Drexel University, where it was the first time we ever shared without any planning behind it. It was just kind of like, put it out there and see what happens. Is what happens in the celebrity world. You've been trained in media, so you get this, right? Is like, here's how you answer media questions. Here's how you control the narrative. Here's how you stay on top of it, so they're not steering you on the questions. So great. A public figure opens up about their mental health. What does that look like in a templatized type of way? My name's Mark Stabina. This is the diagnosis I was given, and this is how I got help, right? Which only further perpetuates the same erroneous messages that, okay, Mark now fits in the 1 in 5 bucket, right? That doesn't help us. So for everyone who hears that and hears the Michael Phelps has depression, suicidal thoughts, Kevin Love has anxiety, panic attacks, right? And then it's usually followed with use Talkspace, use Headspace, use BetterHelp, right? That's a side note piece of it. The only way the conversation becomes normalized is by those public figures, and then by proxy, the rest of everyday people being given permission to go, this is what happened to me. This is my story of what I went through. These are the struggles that I faced. And I'll add another layer to that. It's not a canned delivered speech that has these beautiful talking points that are hit bullet point by bullet point, but instead it's the person just opening up and emoting. We had a gentleman named Brandon Bostic who played in the NFC Championship game in 2015 for the Green Bay Packers. He was down with us last week speaking to a minor league baseball crowd in South Carolina. So where's the connection between a huge 6'4" tight end in the NFL who's played for 4 teams and played in an NFC Championship game, and a bunch of fans coming to a minor league baseball park where there's no major professional baseball there in South Carolina. Well, he got up there and he just started talking about how difficult it was when there was an onside kick. His team was about to go to the Super Bowl, and he made a mental error, tipped the ball, comes back to Seattle. They come down, score, tie it, and then score in overtime. They go to the Super Bowl. The entire city blames him. He feels like he's on an island by himself. 55 million people watched that game. He didn't have his speech written out. He didn't stand in front of a podium. He didn't talk about it through the lens of hitting these bullet points. The dude was clearly shaken as he was sharing his story. And yeah, exactly. It sounds like you've seen Brandon Bosco. An athlete is a human, right? And at the end of the day, yes, these athletes are trained to perform at a very high level. But just like we experienced, I think it's really fascinating what happened with Damar Hamlin. We all watched a traumatic event play out in front of us. And we saw the way in which Josh Allen, a professional athlete, and Joe Burrow, a professional athlete, who usually are calm and composed, shaken. We saw head coaches, sorry for my dog there, head coaches not knowing what to do. Do we continue to play? What does the NFL want us to do? We don't feel like we should play right now. And then the rest of us watched that and went, I just saw something I've never seen before. What do I do right now? I don't know what to do with myself. That is a traumatic event. Just like Brandon, the reason I bring that up is in that situation, he's overwhelmed with, I've trained my whole career for this. And now on the world's biggest stage, that happened. I can't believe that. And then the system goes, what did you just hit me with? He's a human being. That same, I just let my team down, can happen in an office setting, can happen in a group setting, can happen in a band or a choir setting. You don't hit the high note. That's the relatability factor. And when you share real stories and not canned stories that get handed to you, and you emote through them and you share how difficult it was, now people open up and they go, I didn't drop a ball in the NFC Championship game, but this, and this happened. And I felt alienated from my friends, from my teammates, from the folks who I thought were my support system before. And it opens up everyone to be a part of the conversation instead of what we typically do in mental health. Let's have a clinical psychologist up there and tell us what the 5 symptoms are of this list of 20 that you have to have for 2 weeks or more to have something called depression, which there's no actual disease in the body for, but the DSM-5 tells us that's what that name of those cluster of symptoms are. It's a very different approach. And if we continue with this clinical way of looking at things, and I'm not trying to damn psychologists or psychiatrists because we work with them. We work with integratives who see the person as a holistic being and how all the things they lived through in their life impacted them. But I think part of what our mission as advocates to do is say, how do we hold hands with the doctors, hold hands with the people with the lived experience, bring it all together and say, it's not you, the sick, you, the healthy, the doctors are fixing the sick people and the healthy people are okay. It's how do we get everyone to share stories to show we're all living different pieces of this. We're all part of one big group.
So well said, Eric. And that actually leads me to my next question as we're coming near a close. The title I put was A Better Way to Raise Mental Health Awareness. You've already touched on that a number of times. The stigma that exists, how to stop perpetuating it, how to go about changing it as well. What are some other ways, apart from those you've outlined, that people listening to this, people that are going to watch this later, or people in general that I can write about, can start doing more of, to not just raise awareness that isn't perpetuating the stigma, but also turn that awareness into action? For me, that's what awareness is the understanding of how we're contributing to it and understanding mental health and what's going wrong, why it's broken, the system and the communication around it. That's the awareness piece. But like I said before with my story of why I wrote the article, how can people turn that awareness into action? What things, like you're doing right now, can people do to turn that awareness into action so we can really move the needle together?
So 2 things come to mind. So the first is when I got into this space, one of the images that shook me, and I think we need images that shake people to get them to look at this topic in a different way, was the running back Eddie George. Not to make this all about sports, and I'll just use a sports example that then carries over to any other, area of focus that you have. I saw Eddie George, who's this brick shithouse of a, I don't know if you're allowed to say that on LinkedIn, but I just did, of a running back.
Cancel.
And
right. Thanks, Eric.
He himself is 6'4", even though Brandon's a tight end. He may have been even bigger than Brandon. And he's on a yoga mat doing a warrior pose with a football down by the mat.
That's right.
And it shook me because it's like, that's not what we usually see yoga looking like, right? So the first thing I would say that people can do is they can take what they're doing in their day-to-day. They're a mom. They work in a corner office. They, are an athlete. They act in a play, and take whatever their care routine is. And when I say care routine, I'm not saying massage. I'm not saying, bubble baths. So yes, those can be great things. I'm talking about the work that they do on themselves, the yoga, the meditation, the mindfulness, the breathing practice, the havenings, the tappings, things that we call star exercises. How do we take those images and put them into our daily life and share those things? Not in a braggadocious way, in a way of like, this is what keeps me going day to day and allows me to power wash my brain and refresh. Hopefully it's a helpful tip to you, right? People want value add in what they see in your posts. Posts are not all about pretty pictures. Sometimes it's about what can I learn, especially on LinkedIn, from what other people put up there. So I'd say that's number one. Number two, and it brings a full circle in this conversation. You brought up, your friend dying by suicide from the rugby world, and that it was treated as a one-off. Sadly, where we are at with media right now, and I'm not talking about you media like, a guy who announces a game. I'm talking about our traditional media in terms of print and online, is they have a benefit when they treat these stories as one-off car wreck tragedies. On to the next one, forget the tie to the previous one. I saw that no more clearly than last summer when we started to see, sadly, a number of runs of suicides in the college sports space. Tyler Helinski was the first big name. That was a number of years ago, quarterback for Washington State. But last year it was Katie Meyer, the goalie for Stanford. It was Robert Martin, the goalie in lacrosse for Binghamton Lacrosse. It was Sarah Schulz, the big-time track athlete. There was a softball player at James Madison University. And I'm watching these suicides one after the other. The schools aren't connecting it. The media is not connecting it. And I'm thinking to myself, we have media that works in college sports. They may not work across college sports, but they work in college sports. How are we not piecing this together and saying, this is a thread? And the skeptics in the space would go, you're going to create contagion, Eric. You're going to say that it's okay for people to die by suicide. I would call BS on two things. One, we don't choose suicide most often. Suicide sadly chooses us. Our brain, our nervous system starts to shut down, becomes overwhelmed. I've been in that place before, and we start to feel these impulse error messages. That's not a conscious choice. That's the system shutdown that we have to have the tools to be able to break through. Well, guess how we have tools? By talking about it. If we are afraid of contagion, then we go, we can't speak, we can't speak, we can't speak, we can't show the thread. And then we have more people that die, which has been shown outside of COVID. That was a weird year for how do you measure suicides versus overdoses and which is which when people are living at home. We've seen a steady increase since 2007 of suicides, almost in a hockey stick type of way. Steady increase in overdoses. Overdose and suicide, highest that they've been together in the history of since when we've been measuring those two. We need change. So images of how you're doing your care routine, we call them star exercises, and you sharing on your social the thread that you're seeing of the challenges that are coming together. Guess what? We need more and more people hearing about this.
Totally. So good, Eric. And I want to add to that because, again, I learned this from you. Even just language, we mentioned it before. Because with the change in language, there's an intention behind it, and we can correct other people. But I'm now saying died by suicide because, as you said, it chooses us, as opposed to we commit suicide. We commit to it. That suggests that we had total agency over that choice. So what's behind the language is really important. Died by suicide. I'm hearing it more and more. I'm hearing it in movies, and which is shifting in the right direction.
Yeah.
So on a positive note, would you say that, given everything we've said, what are some of the positives that have come out of Mental Health Awareness Month?
I think you're seeing more and more large organizations willing to at least engage in the topic, right? So we did events this month with the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Mets, the New York Yankees. I mentioned doing it with a minor league baseball team, the JP Morgan Chases of the world, right? These are organizations that lead change, right? They led change in the space of cancer by getting 17,000 people standing up and holding signs in the arena sports and 50,000 people in the stadium sports. We need their participation. Now, the guarded optimism is they're still just dipping their toe in it. So they're going, yeah, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. Eric, we'd love to have you come out because you were a sports executive before and talk with our executives. And while you're here, maybe we could do a frontward-facing event. The reality is mental health takes ongoing engagement and culture change and programming in order to flip the script on how we look at this and helping people be proactive. Just like what happened with Richard Simmons in his short shorts and rainbow color shorts and jumping up and down on stages, and Jane, who was it? Fonda was her last name. It'll come to me. Jane Fonda, yes. Thank you. So we had folks in the 70s and 80s that normalized, okay, you don't have to work out to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. You could work out to, remove plaque from your arteries and lose a couple inches on your waist, which will add longevity to your life. We need that same movement in mental health from a proactive perspective, as opposed to wait. If I get it, then this is what I do. We're not there yet. We're not close. But the fact that we have organizations raising their hand going, it's at least something we need to address, is a step in the right direction.
Well, just on that, it's important. And thank you, Christine Grimm, for being here. Christine's my mentor. She's been in the as a coach, an executive coach and colleague, an ally. Brett Brauman as well, a colleague who is a people empowerment director at an e-commerce company. So we're talking about organizations, and you're right, this is where it's important. Christine's been doing this for 27 years at the highest level, coaching executives in these big companies. We have these discussions all the time. So a lot of this does rest on the leaders of these organizations. And I'm seeing it more and more, but at not enough of a rate. Companies, CEOs, founders, leaders, understanding the importance of not just doing this during May. That's a great start. But putting together a program where it gives people in your organization a platform, and that's how we normalize the conversations, by adding things into your schedule, into your programming that has these kinds of discussions. And another thing I will say is I want all of you to follow Eric. And Eric, tell me and our folks that are listening and watching, Mark Lewis, great to see my former teammate. Love you, buddy. I'm going to add that comment. How do we find you? How do we get behind Same Here Global? And yeah, what's the best way to engage in these conversations with you? You're a busy man, but we want to follow you and we want to support.
Thank you. I'll give the answer to that question, and I know we don't want to go long.
That's
with
okay.
The programming, just make sure whatever programming you're looking for, make sure there's a linearity to it. There's a build. One concept builds to the next. Because what we're seeing too much in this space is we lost someone by suicide. We need a suicide prevention training. Our kids are overdosing on drugs. We need a presentation on current drug trends. What is the linearity? How do we understand how we're all impacted? Common language that we could use to understand one another, how the nervous system shifts and how it leads towards emotional pain. If you lay that foundational work, you can get into the more detailed work. But if we start with very specific topics right away, people go, that doesn't apply to me. Mark, you didn't grow up in the US, but I can tell you one of the biggest clusters that we grew up with was just say no to drugs. They told us to say no to them, but they didn't tell us why we turned to them and what emotional pain was. Maybe they didn't have the answers back then, but that's why that campaign didn't stick. You had 80% in the audience who went, I don't do drugs, or I don't do them to that level. This doesn't apply to me. To your question on reaching us, appreciate you asking that. So on the little thing that you gave me here, so thank you for giving me that opportunity. Our social handle is on there. So it's at @samehere_global. Most active on Instagram, do some work on Twitter, mention the Facebook page that we have. So certainly there. The website is samehereglobal.org. So no underscore, but just all one word together, samehereglobal.org. We've got a podcast with two of your good friends, Theo Fleury, NHL great, and Darren Ravel, who's a sports business insider, which is called We're All a Little Crazy. And I just want to say, to the folks who listened and commented, thank you for, this is truly, it means a lot that these things mean a lot to you. And Mark, Mark, the fact that you have Mark, your teammate, on here, I'll share this as well. We have ways to get involved outside of just following us on social. Mark is part of our celebrity alliance, right? People might laugh like Mark Serbina, the celebrity, right? But it's people with platforms who share their Same Here story. We've got integrative practitioners who are part of our practitioner alliance, integrative psychiatrists, psychologists, nurse psych practitioners, social workers who understand holistic way of looking at things and aren't just treating with med management and talk therapy alone. So we're always looking to hold hands with a lot of people and bring people together around commonality, because I think that's the only way that the narrative does change is when you mentioned how big it is that you're noticing died by as opposed to committed. Now take that as a singular concept and say, look at how many things we do need to change. Wow, Eric and Mark, you could do a LinkedIn Live forever, but how many people are hearing it? We need the other people who have other spheres of influence all holding hands, speaking in a consistent way.
And this is your mission, and you're well on your way. And I'm honored and privileged to be one of the OGs in that mission. I'm so proud of you and just overjoyed to see where you are today and how massive.
Should we end on a self-deprecating story, which is
sure
starting our event. You have very low budget when you're starting off, and so I had to fly in our celebs who were there for the event and then put them up in hotel rooms before we knew if anyone would show up to these things. So in true bootstrapping and fashion, Mark was my roommate on event one that we had in New York City, which saved me about $300 on a hotel room. So thank you, Mark.
Hey, it's all about the mission, man. I made the mission and your mission bigger than my need for comfort and to not hear your snoring. But look, I pushed through it. Look, I was just so privileged, as I said, and excited to be there and overwhelmed. And wherever I can, I connect with you like today. Now everybody knows. Now folks, why I got this man on this LinkedIn Live and why you need to get behind Same Here Global so we can keep doing this. And as Eric said, amplify what Same Here Global and other similar organizations are doing. That's all we need to do. Share it, spread the love, spread the word. We've got the right kind of messaging. So it's about just getting it out there.
Mark,
Eric,
I know I said I end on the funny story, but just because you brought it up, to everyone out there, there is no competition in this space. No. And I mean that wholeheartedly. There are if we're right with the idea that 5 in 5 people have mental health, that means there's 8 billion people on this planet. Okay, maybe we could only reach 4 billion of those people the way that we're all connected. Guess what? Is there anyone out there who's got an organization right now that's structured enough to be able to give help to 4 billion people? No. So there's niches within, there's sports versus, lawyers versus dentists. There's ways to do this where everyone can hold hands. And if you have a business behind it, your business can thrive. If you're in it specifically just to help people, there's no greater rich is than feeling like actually helping other people and changing their lives. You and I have been able to be a part of organizations and programs like that. So that's a way of saying, hold hands with others. Don't look at other people like they're competition. Look at other people like we need to get as many people out there in a peer support type of format as possible to really change the way this topic is looked at and handled.
That is a mic drop, my friend. Very well said. Great way to cap this off. Eric, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. And I can't believe I found even an hour of your time, my friend. You're just so busy in this space, fighting the good fight and making great waves. And again, I'm proud of you. I'm honored to be friends with you and allies in this cause. So keep up the great work, my friend. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for everyone for watching and listening, and those that watch this after the live. It'll be recorded and on my page. It should be on Eric's as well. I don't know if you pushed it out to yours, but get on board, everyone. Let's keep the conversations going beyond Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you, Eric. Well, I'll chat to you later, buddy. Thanks, everyone.